Well, welcome to First Baptist Church Denby. We appreciate you being on our live coverage tonight as we continue our Social Justice Week. And we have three expert presenters for you tonight as we talk about policing and Afro-American neighborhoods and policing in general. And we're going to get started, first of all, as we did last night, with the prayer. And and then I'll introduce our first speaker for the night, and then we'll go into our second one. But again, those of you who are on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram or YouTube, whatever channel you're on, we appreciate you joining us tonight, and we appreciate all you do to try to make First Baptist Church what it is today. And we hope that what we do this week will be something that's very challenging for you and something that you can really hold on to and gain some momentum in whatever groups or whatever participation you're involved in. So we thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been a very, very good week so far. The first night, I thought we had really good participation in terms of our online presence. And I saw a couple of videos floating around from last night in terms of the voter suppression and voter registration that we talked about last night. And so I ask you to continue that. You get the video tonight. We certainly ask that you would share that with other people. And the more shares we get, the more people can see what we're trying to do here at First Baptist Church Denby, but not only trying to do in the Newport community. So we thank you so much again. And if you bow your head with me as we open up, I appreciate it. Father, we thank you again for another night of refreshing, for information. We thank you, Lord, for waking us today and starting us on our way. We thank you for guarding us, protecting us, and giving us life again. We thank you, Lord, for the many men and women you put into our lives to be a blessing to, and those who have been a blessing to us. We thank you today, Lord, as we continue a process of learning and information sharing and gathering and getting to know the community in which we reside. So we pray for our presenters tonight. We pray that you would be with them, that you just give them words where they might not be able to find their own words, but you be able to help them to do that. And we thank you so much for the participation of those who are online. And we just ask for a grand time in tonight. It's all about fun, and it's all about learning about you, and it's all about doing your work and your will. And we thank you so much. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. So the first presenter that I have for you tonight, I don't have any kind of card. I don't have any kind of anything written on paper, but anything like that. But if you want to know who this guy is, Chief Drew of the Newport News Police Department, you can Google it, or you can look on the city website and get his information. But Chief Drew is going to come. He has a wealth of experience in law enforcement. He's going to come and give us a spill on things we can do in our communities and some other things that he wants to talk about. He has a full reign to talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. So listen to him as he comes. Thank you so much.
This me right here? Yes, sir. That'll work?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you so much. Wow. So first of all, thank you for letting me be here in this beautiful sanctuary. I was feeling really good, and I walked here, and the pastor said, yeah, you only have about 1,500 people online watching you. And then I was looking for the exit door, and they locked it on me. So, no, it is great to be here. I've been to this church a couple times before. Matter of fact, when I got here in 2018, Chief Grinstead was showing me around, and I may call it wrong, but I think it was a community day. They was here on the grounds out back. And let me tell you something. There was some food being cooked here at every corner, right? And I was like, Chief Grinstead, he's like, listen, this is the place to be. So we've done some other discussions here, and I'm just very humbled. And thank you, and thank God for the ability to just come and spend a little bit of time with you this evening. I don't want to take up a lot of time. If there's any questions, I think we're going to facilitate that if any questions come in. But what I plan to do is give you about a minute background on me, kind of give you about 2 or 3 minutes of what's going on in the Newport News Police Department, and then talk about some things that have affected policing here in Newport News and really policing across the country. And then I'll tell you about some things as we move forward, right? Some challenges and issues. So if I get too long-winded or I get boring or I start to lose you, somebody just chime in and say, can you do something different? But I will do my very best, and I am very humbled to be here with you, and like I said, in this beautiful sanctuary. And to God be the glory of what we're going to talk about this evening. So my name is Steve Drew. I've been the Chief of Police here in Newport News for about, matter of fact, it'll be 3 years, July 4th weekend. So just around the corner, it'll be 3 years. I originally am from Cincinnati, Ohio. After I graduated college up in Dayton, I spent 25 years in Richmond, just up the road, Richmond Police Department, and I was there, like I said, for 25 years and did a variety of things. I was very thankful for my career. I was contacted by a former chief that said Newport News was looking for a new chief, and I applied. And I wasn't sure how far I would go in that process, and as we whittled down, this is where the good Lord wanted me to be, and I'm very, very thankful. This is a beautiful community. It's a great, diverse city. And I'm very, very blessed. The Newport News Police Department, your police department, has 465 sworn officers. We have about 125 civilian. And that includes dispatchers, individuals who work behind the scenes, but 465 men and women who wear this uniform. Now, as we go through, I want to share a little bit, just a little bit about kind of some things that we're doing in the department, and then we're going to expand. We're going to expand. Is that better? And then we're going to expand. Like I've said it 3 times now, so I'm making sure the sound's right. I'm going. Just hold on. Can I get a thumbs up? Are we good? They said, "Can you hold it?" How's that? Is that better? All right, very good. They told me to do that from the beginning, and I didn't. I already messed it up. So 465 officers. Some things that we're focusing on in the police department. It is important for me that we have a diverse department. And that doesn't mean just officers. That means training academy, officers that come and join the department, and all through our ranks and levels. I think that's important. We have a big focus on training. So we've seen some things happen over the last year and a half that we really need to change some of the way we train and look at different things in policing today. But I do believe when I was hired here that I came with 2 things. One, we were going to focus on crime in this community, right? We were going to reduce crime. When I walked in the door, the department had about a 2% increase in crime. So if we looked over together at the last 3 years, we went from, I got here in July of 2018, we dropped by the end of 2018, we had a 5% reduction in crime. In 2019, we dropped to about 9% reduction in crime. Last year in 2020, we had a 14% reduction in crime. And 12. We have 12 homicides this year compared to 4 or 5 the same time last year. However, the difference is our homicides, there's only 4 or 5 that have happened in our city streets. The other 6 or 7 have happened inside, behind closed doors and walls. They've been domestic related. They've been brothers on brother. If you saw the news recently, we just had a 10-month-old that his life was taken by his mother. So the homicides are very, very different this year than what we've seen. Domestic related, individuals that know each other, love triangles, those type of things of what we've seen. Property crime pretty much across the board is down, but those are some of the issues that we struggle with. The other thing before I talk about kind of things that have happened over the last year, right now the Newport News Police Department is about 15 officers short. So we're authorized 465, we're down about 12. And one of the things when we talk to other chiefs around the state is that the vacancies are high. So it's important to me that we keep bringing in good officers here and we keep giving that good training and marketing this department and talking about all the things. We have a lot of support from our mayor and city council. They ask hard questions, but that's fair. That's fair, and they should. But we have a very good relationship with the city manager about directions we want to go, and the things I want to share with you that we're doing have all kind of came about over the last 16, 17 months. So when I look back, I wanted to hit very clearly and directly about some of the things that happened in law enforcement, not just in one particular state, but we're seeing around the country. George Floyd and his death in Minneapolis, issues in Wisconsin and Atlanta. And I'm not comparing our department to any other, right? And I will be very clear and open and honest with everyone here. We have made mistakes in this city. We have made mistakes in this city. I think what helps us, I believe, is the relationship we have with our citizens and the openness and transparency that we have, that when we make a mistake, it is important for the leadership, myself, to be open with this community and tell them that we did it wrong, that we made a mistake. We're all of us are human. Because I put this badge on and this patch, this uniform, it doesn't mean that I'm better than anyone else. I may be held to a higher standard, and we accept that accountability. We have to address it. But I would be wrong, especially in this house, to say that we're perfect and we get it right all the time, because we don't. We don't. And we have to, and I think that starts at the top from leadership, right? I have to set the culture of this department of what's important to us, right? Our citizens, our community, our youth. And you'll hear me talk a lot about that as we go over the next 10 minutes, that youth, that's a passion for me. It's a passion for me because I learned that in Richmond, and even growing up that I had people that look out for me. So there's a reason when we have a promotion ceremony, an award ceremony, our memorial service, when we have National Night Out, you will always see a youth involved, whether they are, if you go back and look on any online, you will see a youth doing a song, being our guest speaker, reading some type of poetry. That's important to me. So what changed in law enforcement over the last year, 12, 13, 14, 15 months? Because we certainly have damages in our profession through the years. But what happened in Mr. Floyd's murder, his death in Minneapolis, was caught on national television, right? It was caught and aired over and over in a trial and conviction. But what you also saw across the country were protests, demonstrations, rallies, right? And some became very destructive, and others, I think, bred good conversation. Now, you'll hear me, or if you've had conversations with me, I will always support conversations over confrontations. I think being able to sit down and talk with someone, you can get a lot accomplished, because we all have value, right? We respect everybody the same. It doesn't matter to me on zip code, race, gender, color, where you live, what your paycheck is. It's about how you treat each other. My mother taught third grade for 30 years, and she still talks to me like I'm in the third grade, right? She will call and say, how are you and your little friends doing? And everybody's safe, Mom. Everybody's safe. I hope. My father was a Vietnam veteran and worked at a paper company in Cincinnati, Ohio. They're both retired now and enjoying life. But they taught me, from being in the church and early on, that nobody's better than anybody else, and treat people with respect. So that's what I try to do here. For me in the Newport News Police Department, I value the people that come to work here. I value the people, the community that we serve. That oath we take is real. It's not just something that we say. But we're going to be the police in this department, in this city. I'm not going to tolerate individuals that take advantage of other people. I don't want elderly people being afraid to go on their front porch. I don't want kids crawling under their bed or diving into the bathtub because they hear gunshots. I don't want people to be afraid of being abducted or abused. But the people in this community matter to me. They matter to me, especially the youth. That's our future. So when I have Lieutenant Morgan, who came with me tonight so I didn't get lost, when we talk about I want a kickball league, and I want a wiffle ball league, and I want a basketball league, and I want to partner with the Boys and Girls Club, and I want to walk in communities, that is for no other reason. It's not about winning a game. It's about our relationship with youth. And I want that first encounter with young people in this uniform to have a conversation. It should not be the first time we sit down to have a conversation, shouldn't be because something bad's happened. So I will tell you, in Newport News, in 2020, we probably had 45 to 50 demonstration protests or rallies. We didn't have anything set on fire. We didn't have any spray painting. We didn't have any property damage. And we didn't make one arrest. One night, the president came to the airport, and some individuals walked in the middle of the street. And they walked into oncoming traffic. One individual was hit. So we did detain 3 individuals, but we let them go with the warning. We didn't make any arrests. So what happened in Minneapolis, Atlanta, Wisconsin, and other incidents that we've seen across the country, and I'm not trying to point out any department, is it made every department, including Newport News, take a hard look at what we're doing in policing. How do we police our neighborhoods? How do we have relationships? How do we build on what we have? The reason I don't think that we have some of the issues here is because we have been focusing on that already. Some departments may be behind the 8 ball, and I'm not pointing on any, but for this department, the one I'm responsible for, when I walk into Jenkins Elementary School, they know me. When I go into the war zone in the cafeteria, they know me. But that's important. when we stop at bus stops and see kids in the morning, that's important. But how we also work in our communities and train our officers is important. We've changed a lot in our training academy. We've probably added, they get mad at me, we've probably added 3 weeks onto our training academy. We created a whole week where we just focus on conversations, how we talk to people. From a traffic stop to a domestic call. And we've also incorporated, Pastor, we've asked, instead of when I went to the academy 26 years ago, officers would teach officers. What we've done now is we've brought in experts to come talk to us. I could talk about autism, but how much more impactful is it to have a mom who has a son or daughter who is an autistic child? Noise, lights, they scare him or they scare her, and they come and teach our classes. We partner with Dr. Lyons and other individuals, the Unity Project, Pastor Swan, who works with our recruit class, and talk about how it's important that we talk to people and how we interact with people and young people. We take one whole week about our academy and put the notebooks away, the computers away, and we work with Pastor Cheeks and just do things in the community all over the city of Newport News. It's important for those young recruits who are not officers yet that they get a whole week foundation. So this is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to do. It's different. We can't patrol the same way we did in 1985. We can't police the same way we did in 1985. We have to evolve and change. And that's, look, I'm old. That can be hard sometimes to admit that we need to do things different. But we do. So a couple things that we've done here. We have a use of force review board that is not all citizens and it is not all officers. It is 4 citizens and 4 officers at exactly even. Every officer in Newport News has a body-worn camera. It's 465. Once a month, we do the month prior. So the use of forces that happen in February, March, we watch all of those. Citizens see all of it. And then they vote. In policy, out of policy, or in policy, but there's some things we could do differently. If there's a tie, then we would allow the Commonwealth Attorney and Internal Affairs to make a decision. There's no tiebreaker there. We allow them to make the decision. So bring citizens in to sit on that board, I think, is important. It's not just police, it's not just citizens, it's doing it together. And I think as we move forward, that's what we have to do. It just can't be one-sided. When we have a promotional process, I invite citizens from the community to come in and sit on those promotional panels. I think citizens in this community should have a say in who their leadership is. If nothing else, the questions that citizens ask are different than questions I ask or others on that panel. And they talk about, how are you going to treat our kids? How are you going to treat our community? What do you want to see different? What's important to you? Citizens ask different questions, and I learn from that, but so do the candidates who are getting asked those questions. Hey, these things matter to people. These things matter to our community. So we talked about our community walks. Every Friday for the summer, at 4 o'clock, my secretary, and she's mad at me, but I've asked her to block off my evenings on Friday. Football season, I like to go to the high school football games. It's great here because everybody plays at one place, right? So I like to walk around Todd Stadium. When I was in Richmond, but I go there, and then I direct traffic afterwards with Chief Grinstead and others, just so I can at least wave to people and they see me that I'm there. But every Friday, I'm going to go pick a neighborhood and walk for about 45 minutes to an hour. If citizens want to come out and walk with me, that's great. If not, that's fine. But I just want to see this community and see that here I am, if you want to come talk to me. So we've changed our training, or at least added to our training. We've put some things in there that our community week. We've put in our use of force review board. We've got citizens that come in on panels. When we make our selection process, I've got youth involved in every promotional, every ceremony you have. If you go back and look, you're going to see a high school student. Matter of fact, earlier today, we did a panel with Denby High School and talked to some youth up in Denby, because a lot of people are worried about violence and interactions with police. So here's my advice to individuals that are on tonight. Again, thank you for tuning in, and I want to leave time for any questions, but here's my advice. The men and women who join this profession, there are 465. Be careful about painting a broad brush that, look at what happened here, look at what happened in Wisconsin or Atlanta. The majority, individuals that take this job and work 24 hours a day and miss things with their families, is because they have a desire to serve community. But there are some, we get it wrong. And we have to address that. And what happens so often is, when we talk about other things, is there was something that happened here. If we would have addressed it here, we may not have got to this point. But instead of turning our head and just letting it go, and we hope it'll get better, and move them somewhere else, we have to address those things. We have to hold each other accountable. I like to believe that we're doing that already here. the things that we had to turn and look in on, we are already ahead of the game. I think that's why our staffing is where it is. People are coming to this department, and when I ask people, Pastor, you know, I can tell you when I went to Richard, they had the nice cars, things were 100 miles an hour. Oh, man, that's where I want to be. When I ask people, why do you want to be a police officer, and they tell me, and then why in Newport News, it's, I see what you're doing with youth. I see what you guys are doing in the community. You guys are into technology. You're into making change. We see officers waving to people. Now, so we're clear, we make mistakes, myself included. And I am responsible for setting the culture of this department, how we treat people. I get emails and cards, letters every day about all the good things officers are doing, but I know some things happen that aren't so good. I've had several citizens come in and look at officers' body-worn camera of a traffic stop. I would encourage our young people, regardless of what neighborhood you're in, if there's a traffic stop that occurs, to do what that officer tells you to do. And then complain later if something goes wrong. Know what your rights are. You also have the ability to ask for a supervisor. We have bad days too. We don't always get it right, and I don't want people to think that. We make mistakes. You can ask for a supervisor. You complain. I have an internal affairs division that falls directly under me, so I oversee those things. But I think we also have to have these conversations, whether it's Facebook Live, interacting with citizens through live stream to answer questions. It is my goal for this department to be better tomorrow than we are today. I believe that we're better today than we were yesterday. We have a lot of people from the state coming down to looking at our Use of Force Review Board, to looking at our citizen panels about promotions. Those things are important. But I also want to make sure we're listening to our youth. We're talking to our young people. We created a whole division to focus on community youth and outreach and exposing ourselves, our Citizens Academy, to open the doors to this department to let people see what it is. What do we do? Why do we do it? If there's a homicide, families will ask, why do you leave someone in the middle of the road? So we try to explain that we can't touch that body till the medical examiner comes, until now it's a crime scene we process. But I understand that's hard. That's somebody's loved one. So I need officers to understand when somebody lashes out at a crime scene, they're not mad at you, but they have no one else to put their anger at. So we just have to remember to be humble and to show humanity. Isn't that what we're taught in this house, in our Bibles? We make mistakes and we move forward to try to do better. I appreciate you letting me be here. I've heard a little bit about the week that you're having. I'm going to log in tomorrow, some of the things that are going to be on. I hope I have not taken too long. I don't know if there's any questions, or if you want me to, if there's anything that Pastor, that you'd like me to touch on that I haven't talked about yet. Sure. Please, let's go right ahead. They're much more important than what I've got to say. Absolutely. Nope.
One question came up: how do you teach officers about race relations?
Right. So that is a fantastic. So, you know, this is a diverse department, and we get officers from all over the country. Here in Newport News, Hampton Roads area, west, different states. We have a lot of officers from New York. I want to make sure that we understand culture and people and locations. Individuals that, single mother working to 2 jobs to try to make ends meet, and has three children that they're almost raising themselves. And a traffic stop, and if we write that individual a ticket, I understand they ran a red light, but if we write her a ticket, that can cause some financial impact. That might make some emotions and people be frustrated. So it's about understanding people. So Dr. Lyons is she's worked with Hampton University. She does a lot of work with us. I've asked her to come in. She's now working with our academy. She's working, but not just new recruits, officers as well. We've created a whole nother class in the academy and in service. So every year, officers have to go through, the state says 20 hours a year. We do 40 hours a year of in service, and we are able to select 20 other hours. And we picked cultural diversity, race relations, understanding. We've even had human services or social services come in and put officers through, this is your income. And it's dealing with individuals who live below the poverty line. And we put ourselves in those positions, and we move from station to station. We have to make some hard decisions. And you can see officers get frustrated. Well, how am I supposed to make the car payment and pay the health bill? And that's, you take a step back, and some people live in these conditions. So so our interaction needs to be supportive and understanding as opposed to it's black and white, because it's not. There is a lot of gray. And how we deal with people matters, our conversations, how we interact. We have domestic violence is a problem in our community. We hired 2 civilians to come in and work with us on how to deal with domestic violence and how to reduce it. They taught us, Pastor, that when I was taught in the academy, who hit who, and that person who's hit first gets arrested, right? What they teach us is when we walk across the threshold of the front door, our demeanor towards the victim, male or female, sets the whole tone for how things are going to go. 2 civilian. We're going to work with the fire department. We should be up at the end of the month. A CARES unit that's going to focus on mental illness. We go on a lot of calls that police are not, that is not what we should be doing. There are individuals that got plaques on their walls that go to school for 4 years about dealing with mental illness. I give an officer about 8 hours. But until somebody else steps up to do that, where does it fall? So we have to focus on it. So we're going to work with the paramedics and a clinician that will drive a vehicle. We modeled it after a Seattle Cahoots program, that they will go first. We'll be there and kind of stay in the background, the driveway. If something gets violent, we can interject, but otherwise they will try to address it. They already know where the hospital beds are, and what services are out there. That's important. That's important. So we have second responders that are almost social workers that we're going to hire and pay out of our budget. They're going to work at night. So when I have something's happened to a mother or a father, and I have a 2 or 3 year old that I'm not on the phone trying to get a hold of someone, I've got workers that work for the police department. Hey, I know that they have training from Human Services that they're able to place and help get them into foster home, Alzheimer's, homeless, depression, all these things that we go on, right? Mental illness calls, it's just, there's a lot of things that officers are responding to. So when we talk about understanding each other, I think it's taking a step back and taking a different approach, a different look, just from the lens that we look through, and bringing in experts, pastors, teachers, educators, to teach us and show us different ways of handling situations.
A few more questions I have. One has to do with no-knock warrants in Newport News. Do y'all have that policy here or not?
So that is a great question. And going back to not waiting till things are mandated, we do not and have not. We don't do no-knock search warrants. What that means is that we're required to do a search warrant. We knock on the door and announce who we are. Knock and announce. Knock and announce. The only time you would go through a door without knocking is someone may be firing at you and you had to save someone's life. But we don't do any of that. Just knock a door down and run in. That's what they call a no-knock search warrant. Mm-hmm. We haven't done that for 3 years. Okay. We don't have chokeholds. We don't teach chokeholds in the academy. We don't teach that. Mm-hmm. Marijuana, the new laws take place July 1. Right. We stopped focusing on marijuana back in December. Now, I got a canine division that's a little upset with me because we train the dogs, right? So we got to find some other things. So if anybody knows, any ideas. But we stopped focusing on marijuana in December of last year, because why put ourselves in a situation where we get into some type of scuffle or something over marijuana, and by the time we go to court, the judges are you knew this was coming. Right. So why even put us in this situation? Right. Now, I still get calls from citizens about they're smoking marijuana out here. I smell it. I know they're smoking marijuana at the park. And we will go by and maybe talk to the individuals, mm-hmm. but it's not a thing that we're searching people or making those arrests. Mm-hmm. And some of it is explaining to the people who call in. The last thing I'll say, Pastor, on that is mm-hmm. one of the things we're trying to work on is educating our citizens. Put yourself in officer's shoes for a minute. He's driving a police car, or she's driving a police car, and a dispatcher says, go to 1210 Porter Street. We got a call from a citizen of gunfire and drug dealing. And I get to 1210 Porter Street, and I see 3 individuals, and it doesn't matter to me if they're black, white, Hispanic, doesn't make any difference. In my head, I've been called by dispatch from a citizen of this city, says that's what's going on. So when I approach those individuals, I already have in my mind, right, they're drug dealing and gunfire. Mm-hmm. Let me be I'll make sure that I'm safe, that I'm going home. Mm-hmm. Those individuals may not be doing anything at all. Right. We live here. We just came outside to get some fresh air. Mm-hmm. But understanding the totality, instead of you're here harassing us, there was a call that came in. Some citizen in the neighborhood called. So what we try to teach is explain to individuals, this is why I'm here. There's been a shooting in the neighborhood. We got a call. We've had robberies here. We're trying to keep your neighborhood safe. Sorry to bother you. Are you guys okay? I'm Officer Drew, just checking in. Sometimes that is very different than approach, hey, are you guys out here dealing drugs? You guys out here, is there any guns out here? Nope, we check everybody and then we just walk away. Well, what just happened? Why can we not have a conversation after that interaction as well and explain on the forefront and again on the after why that happened? We have body-worn cameras. We're required to turn them on, and we do audits three times a month. The sergeant will look on that body-worn camera and how did he do on a traffic stop? How did he do on a call where there was an arrest? How did he do on a domestic call? Just to do a self-evaluation for every officer. So we do those things. It's just kind of a monitor and checks. We don't tell the officers, they know we do it, but we don't tell them when, and it's just to get an idea, to try to identify some type of behavior before it gets any worse or before something happens.
Okay. For those who didn't hear the last question, it had to do with no-knock warrants, and that's what the chief was explaining. Final two questions for him involves the citizen's call. What calls do you respond to, or do you respond to every call that a citizen makes to the police department?
Yeah, just about every call that comes in, we're required to respond. They are categorized in priority 1, priority 2, or priority 3. So every call that is dispatched, we will respond to. Okay. If an individual sometimes the call, it's a bad address, we'll ask for clarification. Sometimes, hey, we think someone's breaking into a home and maybe someone's doing repairs. And not only do we respond, we mark out on the time we got the call, the time we arrive, and what our clearance call is, what time we leave, meaning I came there and I advised Miss Morgan that her noise was too loud. I came there and there was nothing at all. The house is abandoned. It was just someone knocking on the door. Someone was doing house repairs. But we do respond to every call, and we try to get as much information from citizens. And I think it's important when citizens call in about some type of activity, the perception is the officer's going to come and knock on my door and say, hey, we're here because you called. And that's not. You can call. You don't have to leave your number. You will get asked on the other line, do you want to talk to an officer? And if someone says no, then we won't respond to that address. We may call them and say, we're in the neighborhood. We don't see that car you said was driving around. Can you give us any more information? But we won't go up and say, hey, we know you called, and draw any attention to them.
Right.
And they don't have to. They will always be asked if you want to see an officer. And if they say no, then we won't knock on their door.
All right. So those calls about watching birds in the park, you still have to answer those calls.
We would still answer them. Every call that comes in has to be responded to.
Okay. And the last question that several people said they had sons who were pulled over for no reason, and they found no reason for it. So when it comes to profiling, is there a historical thing that's taken place in the city, or since you've been there, have you been able to,
Sure.
tone that down a bit?
So we have to be very careful when we talk about when individuals, a lot of the complaints that I get about my son was pulled over, my brother was pulled over, my daughter was pulled over. I just dealt with one Tuesday. Monday's Tuesday. My daughter was pulled over, and we think it was profiling. If you watch that body-worn camera, you will hear the officer say, I'm doing a traffic stop. There's no rear plate. I'm going to do a traffic stop. The windows are tinted. I don't know if it's a male, female, black, white. And you see that interaction. I'm very open about if you think that, let me look at the video. Let me see what's in the report. Let me see what the clear-up code was. And we can bring people in, and you can watch that video. A lot of times individuals will call with concerns, and they weren't there, but this is what my son and my daughter told me. Now, let me be clear. Do I think traffic stops have happened that there may not have been a valid reason? I'm in a high crime area and I'm stopping cars. That's wrong. There has to be a reason. Every time a car is stopped, there has to be a reason, whether it's for a traffic violation. We used to do a lot of things with marijuana. I smell marijuana. That's gone. That all changed. So we put that aside. So I would encourage, if anyone feels that, if they feel that there's been a traffic stop that's wrong, right? Or one time we get past that my son or daughter were stopped and there were 4 officers there. Every traffic stop in Newport News, I ask a second officer to check on them. But if I'm field training someone, there's someone with me who's not considered an officer yet, and if Lieutenant Morgan would come and check on me and she's field training someone, there would be 2 officers, but there's someone with each of it, that would be 4. There can be a reason for that. But if anyone feels like that, I would encourage you to call, complain. We have an internal affairs division that can pull that body-worn camera up and look at it. But we really stress, why are we doing a traffic stop? What's the reason? And they got to make sure that we put it in there. But I don't think, just because someone doesn't get a ticket, doesn't mean that they were stopped for no reason. I really encourage officers, if we don't have to give a ticket, then we don't have to. Sometimes people talk themselves into one. I didn't run that light. But that's very different than, right? So that's very different than, I didn't see it, sir. I didn't see it. You know what? Please be careful. I know you're en route to a basketball game. You're to a recital, to a church. Just please be careful.
Yeah,
There's plenty of those things that happen. So if they feel like that, I encourage them to call and let us look into it.
Right. So by saying that all the officers have a body cam,
Yes.
and somebody's pulled over, you can always
Yes.
call in, check, and
Yes.
you'll let those people come in and take a look at it.
Absolutely. I'm very open with that.
Right.
A lot of times, I think that we've got enough trust in the community. A lot of times they say, Chief, could you look at that and call me back? And I will tell you, it was a father said his daughter, and I said, sir, I can tell you there wasn't anything wrong with that stop. He clearly said what the reason was. There were 2 officers because he had another officer in the car with him. But I said, you're more, he said, Chief, I appreciate you calling me back. I appreciate you looking at it. When you made a great point with that body-worn camera. Anytime we have a citizen contact, we get a radio call, we talk to a citizen, a traffic stop, officers have to turn that body-worn camera on, and they don't turn it off until they're finished. So that whole interaction is captured. Now, the body-worn cameras are magnetic. So if we were to get in a foot pursuit or a physical, sometimes they will fall off.
Right.
They continue to record, but they're laying on the ground. So you may get the audio in the ground view, but it's not that we took it off and threw it down. You can almost see it when it falls off, but they are magnetic. But all those are recorded. We keep them for about 30 days, whether we get a complaint or not. But I encourage, if you feel like that, I moved internal affairs under me because I think it's important that I look at every complaint made against officers in this city.
Sure.
But if I don't have the trust of this community to do that, it doesn't mean anything.
That's right.
So instead of waiting for that to happen, when we come and do these conversations, when we take questions, when we walk in a neighborhood, it is my way of trying to show, hey, I'm your chief. I work for you. You matter to me. You matter to me. And I think that's how we move forward.
All right, good. Well, there is one pressing question,
Yes.
and this is for those who have a concealed carry
Yes,
permit. If they are pulled over by police, how should they respond?
I would ask anyone that have a concealed weapon or even if they have a firearm, it's always safer to, my name is Steve Drew. I have a concealed weapon permit. It's in my glove box. I'm just letting you know it's there. Most officers will say, that's fine. Just leave it right there. There's no problem. Just need now instead of, for their safety, they may, and some officers will go back to their car and run the license plate to make sure everybody's valid. They may do it over the radio just because they know there's a gun in the car.
Right.
But I would advise anyone to tell them that there's a firearm in the vehicle, just so everybody's aware of it.
Okay.
The known is much better than the unknown.
Unknown, right. Okay. Well, I want to thank Chief Drew for coming tonight, along with 2 of his representatives, along with him. I think he did an excellent job and well-deserved, and glad you here in Newport. You got something else you want to mention?
I wanted to say thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think when you have individuals, regardless of where they're at, that are willing to have conversations,
Yes.
right? So when I see you with or without the glasses, right?
Right.
And when you see me in or out of this uniform, that we can walk up to each other and shake hands.
Right.
And I think that's how we move forward. And I just appreciate you,
Yes, sir.
your church, your congregation so much.
Thank you.
For allowing me to come in your house
Yes.
and spend time with you. So
Okay, well, thank you. All right,
sir. I
thank you,
appreciate
thank you. All right. Let's thank him again one more time for his presence here tonight. Very, very good. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next presentation from Professor. I'll let Jim R. do the rest of it for you. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we will have with us Dr. Lorenzo Boyd. He is a professor of criminal justice from the University of New Haven, Connecticut. Along with that, he is also a criminal justice commentator for CBS News. He will be presenting for us tonight for roughly about 30 to 45 minutes. Also, he was a former member here, so some of you might remember his face. He's a diehard Patriots fan. I won't hold that against him. I know he's crying since his boy Tom Brady left. But to Lorenzo, we thank you for being with us tonight, sir. We appreciate your time that you're going to give us, and we are all ears. Thank you, Dr. Lorenzo Boyd.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Reverend Ingram. Appreciate you. Just to let you know, your mic is a little quieter than Pastor's mic, so you may want to use Pastor's mic. First of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for having me back at home again. As Reverend Ingram mentioned, for 6 years, FBCD was my home church. And I wanted to be there in person, but unfortunately, I'm doing training in Connecticut all week, so I couldn't fly out and come back. I also want to give a special shout out to Lieutenant Morgan, who actually was my student 15, 16, 17 years ago. I know that's going to make her seem really old. I guess that makes me seem older. But she was my student at Old Dominion. And I'm really proud of the stuff that you've done, LT. I'm proud of where you've been and what you've done. So thank you for being the change. My name is Lorenzo Boyd, and by way of background, for those that don't know me, I spent 14 and a half years in the Sheriff's Department in Boston. And the last 21 years, I've been a university professor or an administrator. I do a lot of police training all over the country. In a typical non-COVID year, I do between 250 and 300 hours of police training around the country. So what does that mean? That's roughly the equivalent of running a 7-week police academy all over the country every single year. So I spend a lot of time with police. I spend a lot of time with police commanders and police chiefs trying to do reform in policing. So let's take a step back, because there's been a real disconnect between policing and the community, particularly communities of color. But this isn't new, and clearly I'm not telling anybody anything they didn't know. This isn't new. For 400 years, there's been a negative relationship between policing and people of color since people of color were actually brought to this country. And when we talk about the history of policing, for those that have taken the introduction to policing class, everybody talks about Sir Robert Peel being the father of modern policing, because in 1828, he established the London Metropolitan Police. And that's the first time we see policing that looks like it does now. But we actually had policing in this country a century before that, because policing in this country actually has its history in slave patrols in 1704 in South Carolina, where white men on horses with long guns rode around the South looking for black people that weren't on plantations. And they would capture them, they would beat them, and they would sell them back into slavery. So understanding that, if we go from slave patrols through Jim Crow, through the Black Codes, through the Civil Rights struggle, through stop and frisk, through racial profiling, at every snapshot in history, there's been negative relations between policing and communities of color. But knowing that as a background, I don't want you to think that all police are bad and all policing is bad, because it's not. Because I'm a member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and NOBLE serves as the conscience of policing. And there's a lot of progressive people trying to do the right thing in policing. And I was really happy that the Newport News chief went first, because Newport News has a history of being progressive going back to the 1970s. So I was definitely happy to hear the stuff that's happening in Newport News. But when we talk about policing, let's start with everybody on the same page, because we talk a lot of terms, we throw a lot of things out there. We talk about police reform, and I spent a lot of time working with the Congressional Black Caucus on police reform. I've worked with elected officials in multiple places, and Bobby Scott from Newport News, I've worked with him and his folks on police reform. So let's actually talk about what that means. Because we talk about abolish, we talk about disbanding, we talk about defunding, and we talk about reform, and people throw those words around mostly to be hurtful, but not understanding what that actually is. So when we talk about reform, let's understand that what we're asking for is for policing to go beyond the superficial and reactionary changes to policies and practices. Because whenever something happens, then there's a policy change, and they said, well, we're going to stop that. And policy change is not enough. So when I go into police departments, I do a lot of after incident reports. And when I talk to people, usually when I first walk through the door, the first thing somebody says to me is, well, you know, Doc, these procedures and decided that they're not racially, so you're not going to really find much here. And I say, okay, that may be the case. If your policies aren't biased and your procedures aren't biased, then what's the answer? Because let's just make this plain. Your policy is the stuff that you're supposed to do. The procedure is the way you're supposed to do things. So if your policies and procedures are, the only thing left is the practice, how you do things when nobody else is looking. And practice is actually translated to police culture. So sometimes we need to change the culture of policing, because there's a lot of really good men and women that go into policing trying to do the right thing. And I remember I went to the sheriff's department thinking that I was going to be the change that I wanted to see. But let's acknowledge that policing as an institution nationwide is actually broken. And it's not just policing, because when we just talk about policing being broken, we let the rest of the criminal justice system off the hook, and we let it off the hook. In a conversation with former police commissioner in Chicago, Jerry McCarthy, he said it's not policing that's racist, it's America that's racist. And unfortunately, we get police from America, so policing as an institution is not a racist institution, he says. But we have to look at who's in policing and what we're doing in policing. When we talk about police reform, we need to fundamentally rethink public safety by proactively reducing the scope of traditional policing. Because the one thing we do know, there's been tons of studies done, and I'm not going to bore you with my intro to policing lecture, but the Kansas City Preventative Police Experiment, the Foot Patrol Experiment in Newark, the Foot Patrol Experiment in Philadelphia, says that traditional policing, as it were, doesn't work. And unfortunately, upwards of 90% of policing is actually reactive, upwards of 90% of it. If we take policing from being reactive and try to make it proactive, then that's a step in the right direction. Usually when I walk into police departments and I talk to the command staff and I say, tell me about community policing. And they then tell me, oh yeah, we've got a community policing unit. We've got 10 people, we got 20 people that are dedicated to community policing. Well, when I hear that, the one thing I'm thinking, if you have a unit dedicated to community policing, you don't really have community policing, because community policing is not a strategy, it's a philosophy. So if you've got a department with 400 people and 20 people are assigned to community policing, that tells me then that 380 people are doing traditional policing. That everybody's doing. And when we talk about policing, the other thing that we hear about is defund the police. That's the big catchphrase that happened all summer long. Everyone's talking about defunding the police. But when you stop and ask people, what does that mean? Clearly, it doesn't mean we want no police, because we don't want to live in a society where we have no police. What we want is better policing. So when we talk about defunding, taking away money from the police, let me tell you, the first thing that goes is the training budget. That goes before anything else. And that's antithetical to what we want. That's the exact opposite. We want to train police officers better, but yet when we talk about defunding, we're taking away the training budget first. So when you look at money in policing, according to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, between 80 and 90% of a police budget typically is personnel, salary, and benefits. 80 to 90% is personnel. And of that 80 to 90%, in most major cities, 20% of that is overtime. So when we talk about the defunding movement, actually what we're talking about is the same song and dance that every police chief and every mayor has around this time of year. We're talking about resource reallocation. So what would happen if we take some of the money that we're using for overtime and reallocate it for the reason that we need overtime? That's a better way of doing things when we talk about resource reallocation. Remember, upwards of 90% of policing is reactive. And we did a study in Boston when I was a graduate student, and we found that 74% of the people in Boston that were convicted of crimes had a history of substance or alcohol abuse. So if we know that addiction is a problem, Instead of putting money into arresting and incarcerating people, doesn't it make sense that we would put more money into treatment? Because when we look at what's going on, let's be honest, crime is not the problem. Crime is symptomatic of much larger problems in society. And if we fix some of the larger problems, then the crime rates will take care of themselves. Now, some of the problems that we have in society, we have housing insecurity, food insecurity, levels of transiency, low education, joblessness, levels of addiction. Now, let's acknowledge the police did not cause any of these problems. So it's actually not fair for us to think that the police can fix the problem. And when you look at policing, if you think about it, if you peel away the layers, society treats the police like a social dumpster. Anything that we don't want to deal with, we call 911, kick it over to the police. And that's actually not fair for the police because we want them to deal with homelessness issues. We want them to deal with runaway issues. We want them to deal with gangs. We want them to deal with mental health stuff. How much training do you think they're going to get? And I applaud the chief and I applaud Newport News Police for employing social workers because a significant number of calls that the police get, you don't need somebody with a badge and a gun with arrest powers to actually do that. Most people that call the police call because they're in crisis mode. And the answer to crisis mode is not always being arrested. Well, let's take a step back. When we talk about modern policing, particularly in a free and democratic society, it involves three things. One, it involves the police invoking police power. Two, it involves the use of coercion. And number three, constitutional rights. And when I'm teaching in police academies, I always tell them, you don't forfeit your constitutional rights when you're suspected of a crime. You do not forfeit your constitutional rights when you're arrested for a crime. You don't. And the one way we can prove that out, when we look at a custodial interrogation, when someone's in custody being questioned, the first thing the police say, you have the right to remain silent, which is the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. The second thing they say is you have the right to an attorney, which is the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. So we need to acknowledge because people have done something bad or because people are accused of having done something bad, it does not mean that they forfeit their constitutional rights. But we also have to acknowledge that for order maintenance to be established in the community, the public has to trust and believe in the authority of the police. Let me say that again. The public has to trust and believe in the authority of the police. So when you have police officers running rogue, yelling at people, swearing at people, giving them these off-color directives, it doesn't build cohesion with the community. We need the community to trust in the police. And because there are so many knucklehead cops out there from all over the country doing really stupid stuff, it's really hard to trust. And I remember when the Rodney King verdict happened, and I know that makes me seem really, really old in 1991, but when the Rodney King beating happened, I was in uniform in Boston, 3,000 miles away. And I remember the amount of grief people in the city gave me as though it was me beating him. And unfortunately, when stuff happens in Kenosha or Minneapolis or Brooklyn Center or in Atlanta or in Brunswick, every police officer gets a black eye because of that. Because we treat the police as a monolithic group. There are roughly 800,000 police officers in this country. Roughly 800,000. 750,000 cops. All of which acting differently, many of them acting independently because we don't have any federal mandates for training. So your police department in Newport News may train reasonably differently than they do in Northern Virginia, and that may be very different than they train in Roanoke. Even within the same Commonwealth, there's a lot of changes, and we need to look at that. So when we talk about what does the public want, what do they want? Ultimately, they want procedural justice. Procedural justice is how authority is exercised. So we're not questioning whether or not you have the right to use force. We're not questioning whether or not you have the right to make a stop. We're not questioning whether or not you have the right to give me a ticket. What I am questioning is when you stop me, you then call me out of my name. Or when you stop me, you're ultra rude to me. Or when you stop me for no apparent reason, you've got me getting out of the car. It's the procedural justice that people are looking for. And when you ask, a couple of summers ago, I spent time working for the Gallup industry. They do the Gallup polls. And in 2018, 2019, they did a study on attitudes toward the police. And if I were there sitting in the sanctuary, I would walk around the sanctuary asking people, what do you think the number one complaint is against the police? But since I'm doing this remotely, I'll just share with you. The number one complaint is not that the police shoot and kill unarmed Black people, although that is a complaint. The number one complaint is not the use of force. The number one complaint is not excessive force. The number one complaint nationally against the police is rudeness. The police are rude and disrespectful is the number one complaint. One thing I can tell you is that's fixable. We can train people, how to be nicer, but it's that type of procedural justice that people are looking for. When people have contact with the police, the procedural justice that they subjectively experience affects their trust and confidence in the police. It affects their identification with the police and their sense of whether or not the police need to be obeyed. The more you talk rude to me, the more you're disrespectful, the more you call me names, the less likely I am to pay attention to what you're saying and paying attention to what you're doing. The second thing that people are looking for is distributive justice. Distributive justice is how fair justice is. Similarly situated people should get similar outcomes. Now, I don't want to make a political statement, but we know when the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests went to Washington, D.C., and they had their protests on the mall. And we know they had protests. We know they were protesting because they actually signed permits. And Mayor Mariam Bowser gave them a permit. So we knew they were coming. We knew where they were going to be. We knew where they were going to march. But as soon as the Black Lives Matter protesters signed up to do their protest, to do their rally, again, which is constitutionally protected, the First Amendment gives you the right to peacefully protest. Before they even got there, they canceled police days off. They brought in the military. They brought in the state police from Virginia and from Maryland. They brought in National Guard, and they guarded D.C. as though it was Fort Knox. And if you remember, the protests were pretty peaceful. Fast forward to January 6th, the insurrection that happened at the Capitol. So I was on CNN about 2 weeks before, and I talked about what was likely to happen on January 6th. So we knew then, and we knew the chatter in social media going up to that was saying what was going to happen. The Sunday before that, they had a time and a location of where they were going to meet, and then when they were going to go to the Capitol. So we knew 2 days before that. And 2 hours before that, the current sitting commander-in-chief said that you have to fight like heck and take your country back, or else you're not going to have a country. And he directed people to march the several blocks up to the Capitol. So we had lead time. But yet we noticed that the Capitol Police were woefully underprepared. And the Capitol Police called multiple times for backup, and the Pentagon denied it. And the governor of Maryland asked multiple times, can I send my National Guard in? Can I send my state police in? Because you have to get permission to move troops and move officers over state lines. And 3 different times he was denied. The question that I have for you is, and this is clearly a rhetorical question, what was different from the crowd that was part of the insurrection that took over the Capitol and the peaceful Black Lives Matter protests? The one thing I can tell you is Black people all over the country and all over the world watched that. They were stunned by the lack of police response, even though when the Black Lives Matter protesters were going there, they got a heavy response. Again, people are looking for distributive justice. They're looking for fairness. Similarly situated people should, in fact, have similar outcomes. But again, the criminal justice system in general is biased. Let me read you a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. Justice is blind represents the basic motto of the criminal justice system. It symbolizes equality in the administration of justice, and it represents our basic rights in a free society. And if I were to stop there, everybody would say, yeah, that makes sense. But allow me to read the B clause of this. For many in the minority community, however, society is not that free, and justice is far from blind. Justice, in many cases, has 20/20 vision that distinguishes people on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religious beliefs, and socioeconomic status. So usually when I read that, particularly the B clause, I ask people, who said that? And they'll tell me Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton or Minister Louis Farrakhan or Ben Crump. Would you believe that these were police commanders that said this? This came from the presidential address of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives because they acknowledge that the criminal justice system is problematic. There are biases in the system. So when we ask what's going on, and again, I did an interview on Fox News right after a year or so ago, and when Fox News called, I kind of chuckled. My first thought was, I think you got the wrong number. I'm more of a CNN, MSNBC type guy. You know, I'm on the Black News Channel, not necessarily Fox News. But I decided to go on Fox News because they said they've heard me and they thought my message was balanced. So I went on, and one of the questions that I got was, why are people so upset? You know, why the anger? Why the protests? Why the riots? Well, first of all, when we talked about this, they said rioting is so un-American. Why would you disrupt things? Why would you burn things down? And there's a lot of people sitting there that are saying, I agree. Why would you do that? I'm with you until you started disrupting things. But historically, let's take a look back, because these riots, these things aren't new. And again, I'm not justifying the riots. I'm a classically trained sociologist. My job is to help you understand the actions of people. So when you look at the first protest that we have in our country in 1770, the Boston Massacre, remember they were protesting and the government sent troops to stop the protest, and there was a shooting. 4 people were killed in the Boston Massacre, and the first person killed was Crispus Attucks. This is the first time we see an unarmed Black person in history of the U.S. get shot and killed by an agency of the government. So then we move forward. 1773, when the Boston Tea Party happened. Remember, when we think about the Tea Party, everybody learns taxation without representation, and the colonists from Massachusetts Bay, they're all heroes, they're all patriots. But the rest of the story is when the colonists from Boston, from Massachusetts Bay, decided that indeed they were being taxed, indeed they weren't getting represented, that they wanted to do something with the tea. They waited till nighttime and they darkened their skin and they put on the clothes of the traditional Native Americans and they snuck onto the ship. And yes, they threw all of the tea into the harbor, but they threw all of the cargo into the harbor. Everything that wasn't nailed down went into the water. And then they took their axes and cut down the masts, and then they ripped up all of the sails and they cut the rope, and many of them went below deck and poke holes in the ship to try to sink the ship. And then they left. So when the British troops came the next day, they asked the eyewitnesses what happened. The eyewitnesses said what they thought they saw. It looked like Native Americans that went onto the ship and did this. So because of this, the British troops slaughtered thousands of innocent Native Americans because of this. So as we go through history, we see multiple places. In 1863, the riots that happened in New York for the draft, because people, you know, the U.S. was in all these different wars and we were in the Civil War, and there were a lot of people that didn't want to fight. So the government decided that we are going to involuntarily draft people into the military. And there's a lot of people that said, no, I'm not going to fight. And I'm certainly not going to fight and risk losing my life just to free black people. I'm not going to do that at all. And when the draft happened, people in New York decided to riot. Then they started burning down government buildings in New York City and in Albany. They rioted and burned down buildings. The Boston police strike of 1919, when police officers weren't getting paid well and they didn't have any benefits, and they realized that the secretaries in City Hall were getting paid more than the police and they had health insurance. So the police did a work stoppage and nobody cared. And then they went on strike. And then Governor Curley decided, okay, we're still not going to give in. So they decided they were going to back off, and all sorts of people realized that the police weren't going to do anything. So they started stealing and robbing and breaking into stores, and the police did nothing. The governor said, no, we're still not going to work with you, and we'll just send in the state police. So uniformed police officers in Boston burned down Boston City Hall. Uniformed police officers in Boston and the Boston police strike of 1990, they burned down City Hall. So when you talk about the riots and stuff that are happening, again, I'm not justifying it. The point that I'm making is people riot when they're unhappy. And Martin Luther King said that riots are the voice of the voiceless. People are rioting because they are unhappy, because they don't agree with the way things are going, because they feel disenfranchised. And to say that rioting is un-American, au contraire. Rioting is as American as apple pie, because we've done every single thing that happened in this country. Everything notable came as a result of a protest or a riot. And even the riots that happened post George Floyd, see sweeping police reform. Again, I'm not justifying it. I'm trying to get you to understand. So the question is, why are people so upset? But it's critical that we address these racial issues in order to uncover personal and institutional biases that prevents everyone from being great, particularly people of color. Because black and brown people in this country have had a tumultuous relationship with the police for hundreds of years. So a pathway forward is building trust and legitimacy through empathy. That's the starting point of building bridges. And when I do police training, I do it the exact opposite of the way that everybody else is doing it. Normally, everyone treats the police as a monolithic group, and you train outward toward the community. In my company, when we train the police, now we do the exact opposite. We look inwardly at the police, and we get the police officers individually to talk about biases, to talk about stereotypes. We try to build in levels of empathy. We build in levels of compassion. We introduce critical thinking skills, and we introduce communication skills, because those are the four pillars that help move things forward. So when we ask why the anger, why now, this is not just about George Floyd. People being angry at the police, it's not just about Breonna Taylor. The fact that people are angry is not even just about Ahmaud Arbery or Michael Brown or Sandra Bland or Walter Scott or Terrence Crutcher or Tamir Rice or Laquan McDonald or Freddie Gray or Alton Sterling or Eric Garner or Philando Castile or Botham Jean or Rayshard Brooks. And those are just the people killed by the police in the last few years, and those are just the major cases. In order for us to understand the disconnect between the police and communities of color, we have to have historical context. We have to understand that people are upset and have been upset for a really long time. So then the advent of the Black Lives Matter, I talk to police officers all the time that tell me that the Black Lives Matter movement is a terrorist organization and it's anti-police. And if you believe that, it's just because you're not paying attention, because the Black Lives Matter movement is not an organization. It's an ideology. It's a philosophy. It's a political intervention. It just highlights the fact that Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. Here's a fact for you. When Black people are killed in the U.S., their killers are brought to justice less frequently than if the victim was white. Let me say that again. When Black people are killed in the U.S., we're talking nationwide. When Black people are killed, their killers are brought to justice less often than if the victim was white. And that's the point that the Black Lives Matter movement is saying. They highlight the systemic and continuous and egregious ways in which Black people are violated and the fact that the perpetrators are rarely brought to justice. And remember, this is not a policing thing, because in 2013, when the Black Lives Matter movement started as a hashtag, it had nothing to do with the police. Because Trayvon Martin, an unarmed Black kid, was killed by George Zimmerman, an armed civilian, not a police officer, and he was acquitted. That's when this came about. So this is not a anti-police thing. Black Lives Matter is not anti-police, they're pro-accountability. So when I say Black Lives Matter, and you say all lives matter, well, two things. All lives can't possibly matter until Black lives do in fact matter. And for those of you in a relationship, think about it. If your significant other, if your spouse, if your husband, your wife, your significant other asks you, honey, do you love me? First of all, acknowledge, if they have to ask, you're doing something wrong. So what if your significant other says, honey, do you love me? And you said, I love everybody. How does that work out in your relationship? That's the same thing when we say Black Lives Matter and you say all lives matter, it's the same premise. And if we say Black Lives Matter and you tell me blue lives matter, that's kind of like walking into a cancer hospital and yelling, you know, there are other diseases too. Yeah, we get that. That's just not what we're talking about. And let's just be perfectly clear. Blue is not a life. Blue is an occupation. Blue is a choice. It's a noble occupation. It's a wonderful occupation. For the right person, it's an excellent career. But you get to take off blue at the end of the day and be whoever you want. Black folks don't have that luxury. And you add the extra dimension of being Black in blue, that's a whole different dimension that a lot of people don't even understand. So when we talk about, let me wrap this up for you. So what's the pathway forward? A lot of people talk about reimagining policing. I'd like to start before that. I'd like to reimagine training. And as I mentioned, there's a 4-step process for reimagining training. 1 is introducing levels of compassion. 2, introducing levels of empathy. 3, build communication skills, because a good police officer avoids using force through effective and creative communication. And number 4, critical thinking skills. We want the police to look beyond the emotion, look beyond the passion, and see what the real issue is, because we want police officers to be problem solvers. We want a good police officer to solve problems before they become crimes. And again, it's not about just changing policy. We have to change the culture in policing, because culture eats policy for breakfast. And I was doing a talk for Mayor de Blasio's people in New York, and it was a community forum. And I ended it the way that I end most of my policing talks, by saying the vast majority of police officers are God-fearing, law-abiding citizens that are in the job because they want to make a difference. Most police officers do the job because they want to make positive changes in their community. And when we went to the Q&A section, there was an elderly woman, a grandmother, who came up to the mic and said, well, Doc, I appreciate what you say. You keep saying that most police officers are good people. And I said, yeah, most officers really are good. And she says, where are all these good officers when bad officers are doing bad expletive? And that's a good question. And if you think about it, we have laws now when we go through police reform. Isn't it funny that we have to make a law to tell the police you have a duty to intervene? Isn't that really what policing is? Intervening when people do bad stuff? So why is it that we have to tell them to intervene when people that dress like them, people that work with them, do bad stuff? When we reimagine policing, the goal is to improve community conversation. It's to provide specific training on how to deal with levels of conflict. We want to develop cultural competence, increase dialogue with the community, improve community relationship. That's ultimately what we want to do. In the police academy at Northeastern University in Boston, my graduate alma mater, they do police training for Boston, for Cambridge, and for many universities. And the thing that they do up there, every Friday for the police cadets is half a day. Everyone gets out at 11 o'clock. And from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., they're assigned to a community group, either the Boys and Girls Club or a local church or a homeless shelter or Parks and Recs, because they want the police cadets to get to know members of the community when they're not in an enforcement setting. They want to get to know the community before they start policing them. And I think that's a good pathway forward. Get police officers out of the cars, into the street, walking around, sitting on porches. But the problem with that, particularly from a command perspective, you can't quantify the amount of crimes that you prevented. So if you come back after 8 hours and you look at your tick sheet and you said, yeah, I sat on 5 or 6 porches just talking to people's grandparents all day. Most commanders are going to want you to be out there doing something. But being out there talking to people, getting to know people, that's proactive. That's what community policing is all about. And I want to go one step beyond that, because community policing has the onus on the police, because the community has a role in this too. We want community engagement. We need community members to engage with the police. That's why I'm really happy that my church home, First Baptist Church Denby, is doing this, bringing police officers in and having community members and police officers together. Because I can tell you from everything I've learned from the chief's a great guy. What I can tell you from what I know personally about Lieutenant Morgan, great person. So this is a good start. So let's continue to start and let's continue to engage the community and engage with the police. So thank you very much. I will take questions. Oh, I can't hear you. I'm not hearing anything.
I think this mic is one still working. Okay, use this one. Thank you, Chief.
What policies
Here we go.
or initiatives could be implemented to address negative policing federally, statewide, and locally?
That's a great question. We need a police accountability bill. We need that more than we need anything else. And unfortunately, what I'm going to say next doesn't play well with police, but we need to take a look at qualified immunity, because with qualified immunity, it's not just the police, but government officials are shielded from wrongdoing. If something happens, they're not held liable. And we need to have some policy that when people do things wrong, they're actually held liable for that, either civilly or criminally. We need a police accountability bill that's going to outlaw some of the things that we don't want. If we determine, and I'm not advocating, but if we determine that no-knock warrants need to go out, instead of saying it's against policy, we need to say it's against the law. The chokeholds that have been banned in multiple jurisdictions that people still do, chokeholds are banned. Doesn't mean you can't do them. It means you shouldn't do them. If we ban something, we need to legislate them to say that you can't do it. If you do, you're going to be held accountable. So these are things that I would start with. We need to have intervention from officials. And the one thing I can say, we've been counting on the police to do this for 110 years since we ushered in the professionalism in policing. And to borrow the final summation comments from Johnny Cochran in the OJ trial, who polices the police? We've let the police across the country, and again, I'm not talking Newport News, I'm saying around the country, we've let the police police themselves, and unions have gotten so strong that bad police officers are not held accountable. So we need to have legislation from Congress and from elected officials to help straighten up policing, because that's going to help good cops too. And I still maintain that the Derek Chauvin verdict, guilty on all three, that's the best possible outcome for the police, because it lets good police officers say, that's not us.
All right. I'm glad you brought up qualified immunity. For many of us, we don't know what qualified immunity is. So could you explain that explicitly, what qualified immunity is, and also explain what is the Police Bill of Rights in most states?
So now in every jurisdiction, I'm sorry, in every state, qualified immunity is slightly different. We look at it in multiple states, but it comes down to something called the doctrine of respondeat superior. What it means is if you sue a police officer making $60,000, $70,000 a year, you're not going to get much. If you sue the city or if you sue the Commonwealth, the payout's going to be a lot bigger. So qualified immunity says that if a police officer is objectionably reasonable in what they do, then they're shielded from any sort of lawsuits. But the question then becomes, Rev, what is objectionably reasonable? And who gets to determine that? Because remember, when we go to court, police officers are rarely found guilty. Police officers tend to get the benefit of the doubt. So when we go to a jury, particularly a jury of white folks, when we talk about the police policing in black communities, they're going to say, oh, well, they're protecting me. We're going to cut them some slack. So when we talk about qualified immunity, what we're saying is we're letting the police off the hook if they are objectionably reasonable. But again, who determines that is part of the question. And what was the second part of that?
Talked about the Police Bill of Rights.
The Police Bill of Rights in multiple states have come from the Fraternal Order of Police. And the police, and many times, said that they needed to be protected because they feel vilified because of the stuff that's going to be done. So a lot of times the Police Bill of Rights mandates legal access if they're charged. Before they have to speak to internal affairs, a lot of times they get to go to their attorneys and they get to, wait for X number of days. So the Police Bill of Rights in general shouldn't be any different than anybody else's Bill of Rights. We have the Constitution. We have the amendments to the Constitution that protects people, but we don't have a minister's Bill of Rights. We don't have a professor's Bill of Rights. Firefighters don't have a Bill of Rights. If people are doing something wrong, they need to be held accountable. And for many states, particularly in northern union states, the Police Bill of Rights just shields bad officers.
Well, thanks again, Professor. Okay, we got two more questions. One, you mentioned that community policing is a philosophy and not a strategy. What did you mean by that?
Every single person that goes through the police academy needs to realize that they are part of the community. And there are some people that come through and they decide, I'm just going to go out on patrol and my job is to catch the bad guy. Catching the bad guy is the opposite of what we want to do, because we want the police to engage with community members. We want all police officers, whether you're in a specialized unit, whether, like I spent most of my career on the motorcycles, everybody needs to be engaged in the community. Because if I've got 5 or 6 officers that are community policing officers, then that tells me I don't have to do that. I don't have to engage. I don't have to get out and talk. I don't have to do what we call knock and walks, where you walking around knocking on people's doors. You want everybody in your department to understand the philosophy of community engagement. Everybody get out of their car. Everybody engage the community. Because we've been doing policing the same way, and the police and the community all want things to be better. It's amazing what happens when you lean on the community and ask them what they want. To have the community members as co-producers in public safety in your city. It's a wonderful way to do things, and that's what we need to do.
One last question, Dr. Boyd. What would be the best way to go about handling police infractions? Should it be done by a blind board of selected officials, police officials, or officers, or by the public?
Yes, probably, and definitely. So I have a consulting company, and we do a lot of police training, police workshops. One of the other things that we do, we train community oversight boards. And the police will always kick back and say, we shouldn't have civilians. They don't know what it's like to be a cop. And my pushback to that is I don't have to be a police officer to realize that kneeling on somebody's neck for 9 hours and 29 minutes 9 minutes and 29 seconds is wrong. I don't have to be a police officer to understand putting 3 bullets in somebody's back is probably not the right thing to do. But we do know that we do need some sort of oversight, whether it's legislative or judicial or civilian. We need oversight, and they need to have teeth, because a lot of oversight boards will make recommendations, and then the command staff or internal affairs or the chief, they get to do what they want. They'll listen and they say, yeah, okay, but they do what they want. The oversight board needs to answer directly to the mayor's office and not to anybody in the police department. And the one thing you're going to find out is most civilian review boards are not anti-police at all. They just want to understand what's really going on and make things better. And police officers are really upset when there's civilian oversight, and they shouldn't be, because most civilians are not anti-police at all. And again, if you look at the polls of policing, most people don't dislike the police. Most people are apathetic. Most people don't care one way or the other because most people don't deal with the police. Outside of a traffic stop, most people never interact with the police at all. So to say that society is anti-police, that's not realistic. So having civilian oversight is not a bad thing at all.
Well, we would like to thank Dr. Boyd for being with us tonight, for all of you for joining us in the sacred virtual space. Thank you, Chief Drew, for being with us tonight. And now for our last presenter, we will have. Okay.
I just want to say to Dr. Boyd, I want to thank you again for a wonderful presentation tonight. And, we're seeing some French fries and a hot dog up later. You're going to have lunch on us one day. Hey, man. And we're glad to see you, be happy to see you when you come back down here. Hope you stop in the church and see us next time you're in the area. But we really appreciate what you did for us. It's so informative and right on spot for what we're doing tonight. So thanks for doing your homework and helping us again. We really appreciate it.
Thank
Any
you so
final
much.
comments you want to make?
I told Reverend Ingram when I come back, dinner's on him, and I'm supersizing my drink and my fry when we go out.
You got it, man. Thanks again.
Thank you, sir.
And let's thank Chief Drew again, too, while he's still here. We have our last presenter who's a member of our church, and I want to introduce him. His name is Mark Dozier. He's a retired federal law enforcement officer with over 40 years of law enforcement and security administration experience. He taught drug abuse resistance education. It's called DARE, D-A-R-E, in York County, Virginia, in middle and elementary schools. He's currently the chief of security for the Air Combat Command Acquisition Management and Integration Center, joint base at Langley, in Langley, Virginia. He's a graduate of Troy State University. He has a Master's of Science in Public Education. He has a bachelor's from Southern Illinois University. And he also attended the Community College of the Air Force with an Associate of Applied Science. He's a member of the First Baptist Church. And he lives right here in Newport News, Virginia. His wife, Monica, and he have 2 sons, Marshall and Marcus. As I mentioned, he's a deacon, a mentor, and a whole lot of other things for us right here at First Baptist Denby. So we'll welcome him to come as he will talk about how we can keep ourselves safe when we're turned over, when we're stopped by the police.
Thank you, Pastor Johnson, for that introduction. But the first thing I'm going to do, my wife's name is Mona. Hey, baby. Thank you for the opportunity. I want to thank Chief Drew, Dr. Boyd, if you're still listening, thank you. Very informative, appreciate it. I'm not going to be before you long. I just, you guys have given great information. I'm excited. I live in Newport News, so I'm excited to hear the changes that are going on in Newport News. and I'm about to have a young driver. So he's listening, and we're going to make sure that he stays straight. And so does the citizens of Newport News. So let's start where we agree. We agree that the police want to go home at night. We agree that the police want positive interactions. We agree that the community wants positive interactions with the police. We all agree on that. So once we agree on that, the first thing that we do when we have interaction with the police, we have to adjust our attitude. We see those lights in our rearview mirror. What in the world is going on now? What did I do now? And so our heart starts pumping. Okay? We might say, I can't afford another ticket. Or I can't afford to take off work to go to court. Or what is he going to do now? I've seen a whole lot of things on social media and TV. What's going to happen now? So when we have interactions with police, we have to adjust our attitudes. Because as the chief say, they might just be pulling us over just to give us a little advice. That might have been the wrong turn, the way you made that turn. You need to just watch it. Slow down a little bit going around that curve. You don't know what they're going to pull you over for. So if my attitude is correct, because remember, the police officer wants to go home at night. He doesn't know who, he or she, they don't know who they're going to encounter. So we need to make sure that our attitude when we interact with them is correct. And when our attitude is correct, things change. Things can change. Even if their attitude is bad, as the chief said, they're on camera. So the best thing we can do is comply. Comply with what they say, okay? Comply. As juveniles, when our juveniles are dealing with the police, it's okay to give your name. You give them the name, your name, and if they start asking questions and you feel uncomfortable, say, excuse me, ma'am, sir, I would like to have a parent representative. Please, I'd like to have my parent represent me, okay? Be present when you're talking to me. And we know the chief has trained the troops, so therefore, they're going to comply with that, okay? And you can always ask for a supervisor. So the key is to have our attitude in check, remain calm. Remain calm, and then move forward. Now, if I get pulled over for a traffic stop, what you do is I say stop immediately. You see the police behind you? Stop immediately. Pull over. Roll your window down. If it's at night, turn on your inside light, all before they get there. Turn on your inside light. Put your hands on the steering wheel. Remember, your window's down. I don't care what the weather is. Doesn't matter what the weather is, because at the end of the day, what do we all want to do? We all want to go home, okay? That's what we want to do at the end of the day. We all want to go home. So roll that window down. You have your lights on and your hands are on your steering wheel, okay? Before your hands get to the steering wheel, turn that ignition off. Turn your ignition off. If you have people in your car, tell them to be quiet. Don't say a word. Let the driver and the police talk. If you're a young lady at night and you're getting pulled over and you don't feel comfortable, Dial 911. Talk to the dispatcher. Tell the dispatcher, I am getting pulled over. I'm on Campbell Road. It's dark. I'm slowing down. My flashers are on. I'm going to comply, but I have to pull over with somewhere where there are lights. And as you are telling the dispatcher, and remember, 911 is recorded. Okay, 911 is recorded. If your communication goes awry, when that officer approaches you after you've went to the light, remember, your 911 dispatcher is still on there, still online, okay? They're still online. So now we're keeping our hands on the steering wheel. We're going to be overly respectful. Don't make any sudden moves. Don't make any sudden moves. Be overly respectful and comply. If you're going to go and reach for your registration, first of all, you don't do it until the police officer tells you. They're going to be watching you. Don't make any sudden moves. Tell them what you're doing. I am reaching for my glove compartment. Okay? And as they said, they're going to ask you, do you have any weapons? No, I do not. Okay? But you reach slowly. You reach slowly for the whatever's in your glove compartment so you can give it out and give it to them. Okay? Don't under any circumstance argue with the police. It's not going to get you anywhere. If they are wrong, you can deal with that later on through official channels. But don't ever argue with the police. Even if you believe you are innocent, you don't argue, and you do not resist arrest. Don't argue, don't resist arrest. You stay calm and remain in control. Always watch your words, watch your body language, and your emotions. Always watch your words, your body language, and your emotions when you're dealing with the police. You know, I got to say this, and we're going back to attitude. And there's a big slogan going on out there that says, no justice, no peace. I understand it, but I tell you, if we don't have peace first, you're never going to get justice. We need peace in our homes. If I have peace in my home, I don't have to call the police. If I have police in my community, I don't need to call the police. If I have peace at the workplace, we don't need to call the police. So we need to make sure we get peace before we get justice. And once we have that, everything will work out a little better than what has been happening. That's all I really have for you, because they filled in a whole lot. So I just want everyone to stay safe, okay? We love the police. We thank y'all for what you do and for what you continue to do. And we look forward to the changes that are being made here in Newport News, and we're headed in the right direction. We're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I just got one question, or maybe two. You said try to remain as calm as you can when you pull over. What about those who just have anxiety attacks when they pull over by a policeman? They can't be calm. And that's the first question. The second question, what are the expectations? What should we expect from the police if we be calm and have the right attitude and everything you mentioned? What should our expectation be from the police officer?
Well, if our attitude is, what is our expectation of the police if we're pulled over and we remain calm? That's your question, right?
That's one of them, yes.
One of the questions. That should put the policeman at ease, that you don't mean him any harm, him or her any harm, okay? Our attitude can change the way situations turn out, okay? So having a good attitude should disarm the police some. Okay? And then that way we can lead the way things go. Even if I get a ticket, you know what? I got a ticket, but guess what? I'm going home to Mona, Marshall, and Marcus. Okay? I can worry about that ticket later, but I'm going home. Okay? And the second part, sir?
Yeah, was the
Anxiety.
anxiety, people who just fidgety, you got to move, they just can't sit still when they pull over like that. I mean, and there are a lot of cases like that where people are kind of anxious.
Yes. When people having anxiety and they can't help but be fidgety once the police pull them over. Well, with the police, it also depends on what the situation is and what they're being pulled over for. Because a lot of times they will, if I'm pulling you over, that means there's something wrong. And that anxiety, the police may look at it as if I'm on drugs. I've had some kind of substance in my system. Okay? Yes, we do have legitimate mental issues, and we're trying to work on that. But once you're pulled over with that, okay, the police is going to have to recognize, they're going to have to try to recognize that you do have an issue. And I say with that is time and communication, okay? As the police said, chief said they're going to be trained, they are being trained, they have been trained to communicate, okay? So hopefully the police officer will be able to calm that person down some so they can conclude the business that they're dealing with, okay?
So what do you have to say about so many African-American men being shot or killed in the hands of the police during arrests? I mean, do you equate that to the individual's attitude and lack of calmness and lack of compliance, or are there other contributing factors?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
He asked what is contribute to the factor of African American men getting shot at the hands of the police. Do I contribute it to noncompliance? Do I contribute it to noncompliance? Part of it, yes. Do I contribute it to overzealousness of the police? Yes. Okay. One of the main things is, and I have to say to the police, is we're not there to punish. We're only there to stop the situation. Let the judge do the punishing. And oftentimes when things get excited, the police end up trying to punish you for not complying. And it's not their job to punish. It's the court's job to punish.
Yeah, I think that was the case in the George Floyd case. The police officer wanted, and it had to prove a point or something like that. But I think when you're talking about arrest, it's simple. If we do exactly what we're told and we're still on the arrest and we comply, it should be just a simple handcuff.
It should be.
It
should be a simple handcuff and put you in the back of the car and go. But the other key is, as we said, is communication. And a lot of the things that I've seen out there, they're not communicating back to dispatch, telling dispatch what's going on. See, if policeman pulls behind you, they can run your tags, they know who you are, they know who owns the car, I should say, they know who the tags come back to. So if they're matching the person in the wheel, under the wheel, and what the license plates say, okay, now if you don't have any warrants to come back, this and that, it has you dealing with the situation that they pulled you over for. Okay?
Okay. All right. You have any? Okay, well, that's it for the night.
Thank you all.
Let's thank Mark again. Come on, let's give him a hand. As we have all our presenters. Thank you so much. And we thank you again for watching us tonight. I think we had a wonderful program for you. And I hope you got a lot of information from that. If you didn't, you can always go back and look at the video. It's going to be up on our website from now to eternity. So you have plenty of opportunities to go back and watch. But I think it's a very good presentation here tonight. that really helped us to understand policing in the African American community, and also to understand what we can do to kind of stay safe. The reality, however, is that you can do everything they tell you to do, and you can still end up, losing your life or something tragic happening. And so we have to be vigilant. We have to just understand procedures. We have to understand who we are, and that the fact that we want to go home. I think that's what the officers have been saying at the end of the day. And so I think Dr. Boyd did a wonderful presentation on the overall projection of policing and what is taking place in our communities, and I have to commend him for that, and certainly thank Chief Drew for informing us about what's going on here in Newport News, in the Newport News area. So I'm so thankful for everybody, and we do have 2 officers left. One of them is familiar with us, and let me have your name again. Lieutenant Morgan. And also we have with us Lieutenant Atkinson, who's also still with us. So we thank them for staying with us, and we thank you for our audience tonight. Another thing, don't forget to come back tomorrow night as we finish up with our section on education reform and environmental racism. So we thank you again for coming tonight, and we're going to close out with a prayer. If you would just bow your head with me, and we thank God for being here. God, we thank you again for what our eyes have seen, our ears have heard. We thank you for another wonderful presentation. We thank you for information sharing. We thank you for expanding our minds, expanding our knowledge, and we thank you for the presenters that we had here tonight, and we give you all the praise, the honor, and the glory. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.